I buried my only son on a Monday, and the world felt like it had gone quiet. The next morning, before I could even find the strength to sit with my grief, she came to me with a folded piece of paper in her hand. Her voice was as cold as the morning air when she said, "You understand the house is mine now, right?" She didn't cry, not even a tear. She didn't look me in the eye, and she didn't speak his name. I stood there, holding my breath, while the walls around me felt like they didn't know me anymore. In that moment, I realized that to her, we were nothing but guests in the very house we built with our own hands and love. Before I go on, I want to thank you for sitting with me. Sometimes it's not easy to listen to someone else's heartache, especially when you've got your own to carry. But if you're still here, it means something in you understands. Maybe you've been through your own storm, or maybe you're just trying to make sense of how people can turn so quickly. Either way, I'm grateful. Let me know where you're watching from, and if any part of this touches something in you, I hope you'll share that too. Because being pushed aside after loss, it leaves a quiet bruise. Not the kind people see, but the kind that shows up when the room goes silent and the people you thought would hold you don't. So if you've ever felt that, if you've ever been made to feel small right when you needed comfort the most, you're not alone. I've felt it too. It wasn't long before that awful Monday that he sat me down in the kitchen, just the two of us, while the kettle hummed behind him. He didn't say much at first, just stirred his tea with that thoughtful look he always had when something heavy was sitting on his heart. Then he looked at me, and he said, "Mama, she's changing. I see it, even if I don't say it, the way she talks to you. The way she walks past you, like you're a shadow in your own home. I don't like it. And I won't have you feeling unwelcome in a place you helped me build. I want to make sure you're protected." I didn't know where he was going with it until he reached into his jacket and handed me a manila envelope. Inside was the deed to the house, signed over to my name. No drama, no big speeches, just a quiet decision made out of love. He said, "I don't want you to ever worry about where you'll go. This house is yours. It always will be." I remember looking down at that paper and feeling something swell in my chest that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't pride, it wasn't power, it was comfort, not just in the walls or the roof, but in the knowing. Knowing my boy saw me, thought of me, planned for me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't wave it in the air or tape it to the fridge. I just folded it gently, tucked it inside my Bible, right between the Psalms and the Proverbs, and I left it there. Not because I was hiding it, but because it wasn't meant for the world to see. It was a promise, and a quiet one at that. He may have been a grown man with his own family, but in that moment, I saw the same boy who used to hold my hand tight crossing the street. I was still his mother, and he was still thinking of me. After the funeral, the house changed. Not just the air or the quiet, but the way it started to feel beneath my feet. His jacket disappeared first, the one he always wore to rake leaves, still with the tear on the left sleeve from trimming the hedge too close. Then his tools vanished from the shed, the same tools he used to build our front steps, the ones still carrying little splinters from his hands. And then the recliner, his favorite spot in the whole house, gone, like it had never held the shape of him night after night. I asked once, not sharply, just softly, where his things had gone. She didn't look up from her phone when she said, "You need to start letting go." Her voice didn't hold any warmth, not even a trace, just cool words tossed across the room like crumbs. That was the moment I stopped asking questions. Not because I agreed with her, but because I didn't want to hear her say anything else. It hurt enough already. She started changing things fast after that. Locked doors that had never been locked before. The kind of locks that made you feel like a visitor in your own kitchen. She brought in people. Strangers with sharp shoes and louder voices, showing them around like she was hosting a party instead of holding space for a man who had just passed. I'd sit on the porch and watch them come and go, their cars idling too long in the driveway, their laughter too careless for a house still in mourning. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a hallway in a building I didn't have keys to. She stopped cooking, stopped greeting me in the mornings, and started decorating like she had just moved in. Curtains were changed. The paint cans came out. She even asked if I wanted my room painted, Said it with a smirk like she was offering a kindness. I told her no, and she didn't ask again. There was something behind her eyes now, not sadness, not pain. Hunger. The kind that doesn't come from the belly, but from something deeper. A kind of wanting that has nothing to do with healing and everything to do with control. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not yet. But I noticed everything. Every item that vanished, every picture that was taken down, every time she passed the room where his coat used to hang and didn't even glance that way. The house had gone cold. Not from the weather, but from the silence. And I knew then what she was building, piece by piece, wasn't a new life. It was a world with no trace of him. Or me. It wasn't long after the laughter started in the living room, loud voices that didn't know the weight of that house, that she came to me with her arms crossed and her mouth already set. She didn't even sit down. She stood in the doorway and said, "I've made a decision. I can't rebuild my life with people in the way. You and your husband should start thinking about other arrangements." Just like that. No conversation, no softness. As if we were clutter in the attic that needed clearing. I looked at her for a long time, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. She wanted the house. Not the memories, not the legacy, not the love built into its corners, just the space, the title, the control. So we packed. Not rushed, not in tears, but carefully, neatly, with dignity. I folded every sweater like I was tucking away a piece of my son's smile. I labeled every box, even the ones I knew she'd throw out. I left her the keys on the hook where we always kept them, and I filled the pantry before we left. Rice, flour, canned beans. Things she never asked for, things she didn't thank me for. But things I knew would be there when she opened the door and realized silence isn't the same as surrender. I didn't tell her about the deed. I didn't remind her whose name sat on that paper buried in my Bible. That was never the point. We walked out together, my husband and I, without a scene. No slammed doors, no final words. Just the quiet sound of our feet stepping off the porch we'd painted every summer. And I carried nothing but a small bag and a long memory. Not because we had to go, but because I wanted to see who she would become when she believed she'd won. People show you who they are when they think they've removed all resistance. I wanted to see how far she'd go when she thought no one could stop her. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is step aside and let them think the game is over. While you're still holding the real piece they never saw coming. Not long after we left, word started trickling back through the neighborhood. One neighbor mentioned seeing different cars parked outside each day. Another said there were strange faces stepping off the porch, like they belonged there. I didn't need to ask questions. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't grieving. She was remodeling, rebranding, erasing. She painted over the walls we'd patched together, covered the nail holes where our pictures once hung, replaced curtains we sewed ourselves with cold, stiff blinds that shut out more than just sunlight. And room by room, she turned a life into a listing. I heard she walked strangers through the house with a clipboard in hand, showing off the backyard like it hadn't once held birthday balloons, summer sprinklers, and bare feet chasing fireflies. She opened my son's door like it was nothing more than square footage, called it a flexible space, great for a guest or storage, not once mentioning the nights he stayed up in there studying with sore hands from work, or the mornings he would lean against the doorframe just to check if we were awake. She stood in my kitchen, talking about granite counters and cabinet space, without saying a word about the meals we shared, the recipes I taught him step by step, or the pot he once burned trying to surprise me with breakfast. She called the living room spacious. Not sacred. She pointed to the hallway and said it had good lighting. She didn't say it was where we paced during restless nights, waiting on phone calls, praying over the future. There was no mention of how many stories were whispered in those corners, or how many times our laughter filled those walls until it echoed. She made it all sound so clean, so simple, like no one had ever cried there or danced or hoped or held their head in their hands. I watched it all from a distance. I never got close, just a few steps behind, always in the quiet. I passed the house once, on purpose, and saw a man in a suit walk out with a brochure. He smiled like he'd just seen opportunity. She smiled too. But not like someone who was moving forward, more like someone who believed she'd won something permanent. She was turning our history into cash, renting out the echo of a family and calling it progress. Still, I said nothing. Not to her. Not to anyone. Because some storms you don't chase. You wait for them to collapse on their own. And I knew that house better than she did. I knew it didn't take kindly to false promises or empty pride. I knew which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck during summer. I knew it would remember us, even if she tried to wipe us away. And while she played hostess to strangers, I kept waiting. Not with bitterness, but with the kind of patience that comes from knowing the difference between owning a place and belonging to it. I should have expected it, really, after all the renters came and went, after the walls were repainted and the rooms renamed. But still, when I passed by and saw that crooked little sign sticking out of the grass that we once planted together, something inside me shifted. Not in anger, not even in shock, but in a slow, steady kind of disbelief. There it was, in bold red letters, tilted just slightly in the wind like it had been planted without care. For sale. I stopped walking. My feet just froze. That house wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And now she was parading it like some fresh start, like it had nothing tethered to it. No history, no loss, no love. Just 4 walls and a price tag. She scheduled open houses, lined them up like interviews. One couple came with a toddler who spilled juice in the living room. Another came with a clipboard, measuring corners and pretending to smile. She walked them through like a hostess, told them the space had been in the family, but she was ready to begin again, ready to let go. She wore clothes I'd never seen before, newer, flashier. Her voice sounded rehearsed, not like someone selling a home, but like someone selling a version of herself. She stood in the same place my son used to lean while eating toast, and told strangers they could paint the walls any color they liked, knock out the pantry, maybe open the kitchen. She told them there was no mortgage, no drama, no complications. She didn't tell them the deed wasn't hers. She didn't tell them about me. I watched from the corner of the street, my coat pulled around me, unnoticed like a tree or a shadow. My husband asked if I wanted to speak up, to call her out, to walk in and end it all right there. I shook my head. Not yet. See, she believed grief had handed her something final. She thought loss was a transaction. But what she never understood was that love comes with its own terms and conditions. One's not written on paper, but on hearts. And my son had already read them carefully. So I went home. I opened the drawer where the Bible still sat, quiet and undisturbed. Inside was the envelope he gave me, the same one I had folded so carefully the day he left it in my hands. I took it out, smoothed the corners, placed it in a fresh envelope, and mailed it. No note, no explanation. Just the truth, sealed and stamped. I didn't need to threaten her, or argue, or even raise my voice. That one envelope carried more weight than all her open houses combined. Because it didn't just hold paper, it held a promise. She thought the silence meant surrender. But silence can be the sound of something about to land. She thought grief made her the owner. But she didn't read the fine print on love. And she never asked who the house belonged to, because she was too sure it belonged to her. So I let the truth speak louder than anything I could say. I let it arrive in her mailbox while she was busy welcoming buyers. And when she opened it, the game she thought she was playing changed. Quietly, completely, without warning. It didn't take long after I mailed that envelope, maybe 4 days, maybe 5. I wasn't watching the clock, I was just waiting on the shift. And then, it came, quiet, like most truths do, but it didn't stay quiet for long. One of the neighbors, the one who waters her begonias like clockwork, called and said she saw the for sale sign yanked out of the lawn before the sun was even up. Said there was a white car parked in the driveway with tinted windows and a serious man in a suit standing by the door. Not a buyer, not a friend, not someone you invite in for coffee. The kind of man who doesn't raise his voice, but his words carry weight. She said my daughter-in-law opened the door smiling, like she always does when she thinks she's in control. But that smile didn't last more than a minute. She looked at the envelope like it was poison, said his name quietly, looked down at the seal. Her hands didn't move for a moment. Then she opened it slowly, like maybe if she took her time it would say something different. But it didn't. The paper was crisp, the signatures clear, The date as legal as the day it was signed. I wasn't there to see it, but I've known her long enough to picture it. The way her mouth must have dropped open just slightly. The way her eyebrows must have tightened, like she was trying to process what couldn't be undone. She called the buyers. They were already halfway through their paperwork. She tried to smooth it over, I imagine, probably told them it was a mistake, that something had been overlooked, that it would all be fixed soon. But it wasn't a mistake, and it wouldn't be fixed, not the way she wanted, because they saw the deed. They saw the truth. And buyers don't like surprises, especially not legal ones, so they pulled out, just like that. No argument, no second chance. They didn't even ask to renegotiate, they just walked away. I heard she sat at the kitchen table after they left, staring at nothing. The same kitchen where I taught him how to peel potatoes. The same table where we folded laundry, wrote birthday cards, held hands when the storms hit. Now it was just her and a truth she didn't prepare for. And the walls, no matter how much she painted them, couldn't protect her from the fact that the ground she stood on was never really hers. She didn't call me. She didn't come knocking that day. But I knew. I could feel the air shift, like a weight had lifted off the house itself. Like the doors had exhaled. She hadn't just lost a sale. She lost the illusion. She lost the story she'd been telling herself since the day we buried him, that this house, this life, was somehow hers to rewrite. And once that fell apart, there was nothing left for her to stand on but silence. It wasn't public. There were no headlines. No one came running to my door to celebrate. But I didn't need noise. Watching a person unravel without you lifting a finger is its own kind of quiet justice. Not loud, not cruel, just honest. And in that moment, whether she'd admit it or not, she knew exactly what I had done. Not to hurt her, but to remind her. You can't erase what was never yours to begin with. It was late in the afternoon when she came. The sky was a pale gray, not stormy, not clear, just caught somewhere in between, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I was folding towels in the small living room of our apartment, just finishing up the last corner, when the door flew open without warning. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She just walked in like the hinges owed her something. Her eyes were wide, red at the edges, and her breathing came sharp through clenched teeth. She looked around that room like she was above it, like it insulted her just by existing, and then her voice hit the air. Loud, shaky, not from fear but from something else, humiliation. You tricked me, she shouted, louder than she needed to. You had no right. That was my husband, and you went behind my back. You made me look like a fool. I didn't flinch, I didn't rise. I just kept folding the towel slowly, smoothing the corners the way I always do. Her words came fast, jumbled, not because she had something to say, but because she didn't know how to sit with the silence that followed her choices. She stood there, waiting for me to match her anger, to give her something to push against. But I stayed still. I looked up once, not with fire, not with pity, just with the kind of stillness that makes some people uncomfortable. Then I said, he was my son. And he made sure you couldn't erase that. That was it. No shouting match, no long speech, just that one sentence that landed heavier than any raised voice could. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out right after that. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that the power she thought she held was paper thin. All that confidence she carried when she walked out of that house with her head high and her keys swinging meant nothing now, because the foundation of her claim had cracked, and I hadn't laid a finger on it. She did that all on her own. She stood there a moment longer, like she was searching for something to say that would undo what had been done. But the room gave her nothing. No sympathy. No fight. Just the truth, hanging in the air between us. She looked around at the walls, the quiet, the folded laundry, as if trying to make sense of how I could live in a place so small and still walk with peace. But what she didn't know was that peace isn't built by square footage. It's built by knowing who you are and who you're not pretending to be. Eventually, she turned around and walked out. No apology, no goodbye, just the sound of the door clicking shut, this time from the outside. I stood there for a long moment after she left. Not in victory, not in celebration, just letting the stillness settle back in. Because some visits don't need to be answered with words. Some visits just confirm what you already knew. That truth doesn't shout, it waits. And when it's time, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply reminds. She didn't come back after that day. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a whisper passed through the walls. And then one morning, before the sun had even fully touched the trees, the neighbor across the street called and said her car was gone, the driveway empty, the house quiet. No movers. No goodbyes. Just gone. Left in the middle of the night like a shadow slipping out of a room it was never meant to fill. She didn't take the curtains. She didn't clear the pantry. She didn't even take the pictures off the walls, the ones she'd once hung to cover the ones we took down. It was as if she vanished without finishing the story she tried to write over mine. I didn't rush. I waited 3 days, not because I was unsure, but because I've learned that some endings deserve space. When I finally went back, I didn't bring anything with me. No suitcase, no box. Just the key. The same one I'd kept tucked deep in my coat pocket, warm from my hands and older than most of the locks people use these days. I stood at the front steps for a long time before I even turned it. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted the house to feel me coming back. To remember. The door opened with the same soft click it always had. That sound brought tears to my eyes faster than anything she ever said. I stepped in and the air was still, like the house had been holding its breath all this time. I walked through every room slowly, touching corners like they were pages in a book I hadn't read in years. There were faint traces of her still, a mug on the counter, a forgotten shoe by the door, but none of it held weight. None of it reached the walls. The soul of the house had been waiting for something else. In the kitchen, the light fell just right across the table, the same place he used to sit with a spoon in one hand and dreams in the other. The living room still creaked where his chair used to rock. The hallway still smelled like the polish I used every Sunday. She hadn't erased those things. She just tried to paint over them, and the paint never truly stuck. Because you can't cover love with layers of ambition. It bleeds through. It remembers. I stood in his old room last, the one she called extra space, as if memories could be boxed up and labeled spare. The bed frame still had dents from the time he jumped on it too hard. The closet still had the scratch he made trying to build a shelf without measuring. I ran my fingers along the edge of the window, and for the first time in a long time, I let the silence fill me. Not the kind that hurts. The kind that heals. The kind that says, "You're home." It wasn't about taking anything back. It wasn't even about winning. It was about restoring what should never have been questioned. A mother's place, a promise honored, a house that finally exhaled. And as I stood there with the key still warm in my palm, I realized it wasn't the walls I missed. It was the feeling of being rooted again, of knowing that what he gave me, what he quietly secured before he left this earth, wasn't just shelter. It was proof that he saw me, that he knew who would still be standing when everything else faded away. I didn't walk in with noise. I didn't call anyone or post a single word about being back. I didn't need to. That house knew I was home. It knew from the way my footsteps slowed at the doorway, from the way I ran my hand along the banister like it still carried his fingerprints, from the way I paused before turning the light on in the front hall, not to see better, but to feel it again, the way it used to glow when he came home late, and I'd leave it on like a silent welcome. Everything was still. Everything waited for me. And I didn't rush a single moment of putting it right. The next morning I walked into the yard with a spade in one hand and a bag of tulip bulbs in the other. The same yard where she'd once planted signs, each one with bold letters promising space and availability. She had called them offers. I called them insults. I knelt where one of her signs used to stand, and I dug. Not with anger. Not with spite. Just with steady hands and quiet breath. I placed the bulbs gently into the earth, pressing them in like prayers. Tulips, red and white, the kind he used to bring me every spring when he remembered I liked flowers that came back year after year. Not showy, just faithful. Then I moved inside. I took down the generic art she'd hung, the kind that looks like it belongs anywhere because it means nothing. I folded it carefully, stacked it by the back door, and said nothing more about it. I opened the hallway closet and found the frame we'd wrapped in soft cloth, the one with his picture in it. He was smiling in that photo. Not posed, not prepared, just caught mid-laugh, the kind that fills a room without trying. I hung it right back above the fireplace where it had always belonged. And below it, I placed the boots he used to leave by the door, scuffed, worn at the soles, still with a faint crease in the leather where his ankle bent every time he knelt to tie them. I didn't clean them. I didn't polish the past away. I just set them there like they never should have been moved. Room by room, I brought the house back to itself. I opened the kitchen window that she had painted shut. Let the breeze in. Let the smell of fresh dirt drift through. I pulled the blanket from the linen closet, the one he always used on the couch when he fell asleep with the television still humming. I placed it across the armrest and smoothed out the corners with the same care I once gave his growing years. No words, no tears, just restoration. She had made a business of the home, turned the memories into transactions, measured everything in square feet and monthly rates. She looked at the walls and saw inventory. I looked at them and saw laughter, heartbreak, late-night talks, the echo of his voice bouncing down the hallway, the sound of him calling for dinner like he hadn't just eaten 2 hours before. She tried to price it. I simply let it breathe again. This wasn't revenge. That would have been too small for the love we shared. This was healing. This was memory laid carefully back where it belonged, like a quilt pulled up over a sleeping child. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to feel the house remember me as much as I remembered it. And with every tulip I planted, every frame I rehung, every quiet corner I brought back to life, I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was mending something deeper. Something no one ever really saw when we left. But I felt it every time I turned a key and stepped into silence. This time the silence felt warm. This time it said, "Welcome." If you've ever been asked to step aside from something you helped build with your own hands, your own heart, and your quiet sacrifices, I know how that feels. If you've ever lost someone and then been made to feel like you were the one that no longer belonged, like your place disappeared the moment they did, then this story might echo something inside you. And if it does, I hope you'll leave a comment. Or just write, "I stayed. That's enough." Because staying doesn't always mean staying in the room. It means holding on to the truth when someone tries to rewrite it without you in it. And if you're listening to this in silence, maybe with your hands folded or your heart heavy, just know, you're not alone. You were part of the story. And your part mattered. It still does. She thought the deed was just paper, a form, a transaction. But to me, it was a promise, a whisper from my son that said, "I've got you, Mama." I walked through the living room slow, letting my fingers trail along the back of the couch, past the shelf where his childhood picture still sat, still smiling like he never left. I didn't keep the house to punish her. I kept it to remember him, to hold what he gave me when he knew he couldn't stay. I lost my son, but I didn't lose my voice, or my home, or the quiet strength that carried me through the storm. Thank you for sitting with me this long. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, I hope you find the courage to share it, with me, or with someone who'll listen. And if you're still in the middle of your own hard chapter, still healing, still hurting, come back. I'll be right here. And if this meant something to you, I hope you'll subscribe. Because I'm not done yet. There's more to tell.